Alright, peace and greetings, YouTubers. So welcome to another edition of In the News. Let's just jump into it. I really should have just called this video Foolery, because I swear every story that I have seen in the last 2 weeks is just like, what is in the water? Like, it's spring. It's supposed to be a happy time. You know, the trees and the flowers and stuff are supposed to start blooming and the birds are supposed to chirp, but the whole world went act crazy. Everybody has lost their minds. This has just been like, what? Like, I don't know if you've seen, there's this clip I saw. It kind of went viral a few weeks back, but it's from the Jerry Springer Show. I don't know the context of what actually happened in the episode, but the clip is the woman's reaction to whatever terrible news that she just got. I don't know if it's something like the sister sleeping with her husband or something. I don't know. But when you see the clip, it's this woman and she just goes, what? Like, it was just like she said it with such hurt and disgust and confusion and rage. And like, literally, that's been my mood at every story I've seen. What? So I feel like I'm gonna do that the rest of this video every time we get to one of these crazy stories, and you got to do it to make the hair move. The hair has to move or it doesn't have the same effect. And so before I get into all the foolery, let me jump into some happier things first that don't raise our blood pressure. And so I saw the announcement with Verzuz and some of the features that are coming up in a few weeks. And so you see that they have the one with Earth, Wind & Fire and the Isley brothers, and they have another one with Xscape and SWV. I'm one of those same people who always complain, and I'm always like, you know, I'm kind of tired of Verzuz because I think it's gotten so commercial, it's not even the same anymore. I love when we have something that feels like it's ours, or there's that raw element, and it really feels like it's you and all the cousins and the friends kicking it in the living room. You're not really getting that from Verzuz anymore because it's been so, yeah, you know, because just think back, those original ones, folks were like on FaceTime in their living room or in their studio, and now it's, you know, now they're on sound stages, and you got the product placement and the Doritos advertisements, and the entourage got to be there, and this person has to be in hair and makeup. I'm like, all right, but, you know, because the acts that are listed are so good, I'm like, oh, I'll definitely watch these two. I definitely want to see these, but I hope it's really about the music, and it's not all just the promotion and commercial monetization. That crap really kills the vibe. And then it's also just a different era, because I think at this point, with COVID kind of shifting into a new realm and people are kind of out and about a little bit more, people aren't really locked into the house anymore. I think that fear has kind of shifted, and that, you know, you have the things with the vaccines and stuff, and the numbers are kind of starting to level out depending on where you live. We'll cross our fingers and hope it stays that way, but you know how America's gonna be America. We'll know where we're gonna be in 4 months. It might be even crazier. Let's not put it in the universe. But anyway, with these 4 acts, I'll definitely watch. I think with Earth, Wind & Fire and the Isley brothers, I think it's hard to find a match for either group, especially the Isley brothers, because they have such a long history and a long career. You know, they came out in the mid-50s, and so even with them, you know, doing a showcase with Earth, Wind & Fire, who was a group that really got their jump in the early 70s, the Isley brothers already have like a whole 15-year head start of music. And, you know, I think for me, when I think of Earth, Wind & Fire a lot of times, in addition to love songs, I really just think of like heavy disco music and funk music. That's what I think of with them. The Isley brothers, I think it's that, but it's a little bit more as well, because they've been in the industry so long, you've even heard and watched music shift. Like when you think to when they were first coming out, you know, you make me wanna shout, like, you know, you've watched music change. That's how long they've been in the game. So I'm like, I don't even know if these two are a good match, but it is what it is. I'll definitely watch to support. I would have more so put Earth, Wind & Fire and Kool in the Gang together, more so, because they kind of have a similar time lapse when it comes to when they were in industry and what it was that they could contribute. As far as favorite songs, or at least singles, because Verzuz, to me, I like Verzuz in regards to just how the songs connect to people, but a lot of people look at it through the lens of hits and chart placement. So if we're going by singles, my favorite Isley Brothers song has always been Voyage to Atlantis. And I also really like Work to Do, and I also really like Summer Breeze. I really like their version of Summer Breeze. I like the other version too with Seals and Croft, but I really like the Isley Brothers version. With Earth, Wind & Fire, my favorite single was always That's the Way of the World. Like, I love that song. It still sounds so fresh when you hear it. I love the arrangement, everything. And even when it comes to their albums, my favorite Earth, Wind & Fire album has always been Illumination, oddly enough, because that's one of their later albums. That's 2005, 2006. But what I loved about the album was that it's a great example, and I think I've said this in my R&B is Dead series, it's a great example of when you can have a seasoned act put out an album that's current, but it still feels like them. Like, it fit for 2005, 2006, but it still felt like Earth, Wind & Fire. You still had the brass sections, you still had the love songs, the great vocals, the arrangements, but it fit for 2005, 2006. And mind you, when that came out, I was a teenager, so I was still like, mind you, I'm over here bopping a group from 20, 30 years before my time. And so that was a really great album. Like Kelly Rowland and Marsha Ambrosius and Raphael Sadiq and will.i.am are on it, and that's a really great album. You should check that out when you get a chance. As far as Xscape and SWV, my favorite singles, SWV would have been Downtown. I love that song. And then with Xscape, My Little Secret has always been my favorite Xscape single, especially when I saw them in concert a few years back. It sounded so good in that Capital One Arena with the full band and everything. I enjoyed it. That was a great show. That was fun to watch. People were saying that those two groups aren't even really equally matched either. And you know what I was thinking? I think with a lot of the girl groups from the 90s, especially the bigger ones that really started to move some units, so the TLCs and the SWVs and In Vogues and Xscape, TLC, SWV, In Vogue, those four. I feel like you could probably put any of those two together and have a decent versus, but there's still going to be some things that work and some things that don't work. Some of those things would be the conversation of time, again. Like a group like In Vogue, really, their heyday is the first half of the 90s, and as you got to the second half, you have Dawn leave the group, and EV3 is not really the hit that it could have been, and Masterpiece Theater that came out in 2000 was pretty much ignored, and so it limits them to really just that early half of the 90s, and so it makes it harder for them to compete with some of the groups that might have still had a decent run later in the 90s. Then you have some groups that got bigger. I don't know, it's a weird little combination. What I think could be dope, and by the way, this is not a diss to any of those groups. I just think because all four of those groups had such unique careers or career runs, it doesn't matter who you're going to put in the room with who. Something's not going to work. You could do TLC and In Vogue, but there's still going to be some things, again, conversation of time. By the time you get to 99, In Vogue is not really a part of the conversation, and TLC just has this big monster hit with no scrubs, or, so on and so forth. Or if you do Xscape and In Vogue, it's probably not a fair shot in the beginning because In Vogue has the early edge to start out with, and then there's a conversation of the sounds of music, and if you're going to do the New Jack Swing thing, Xscape comes out at the end of New Jack Swing, but the other three groups all have at least one New Jack Swing album. Like, it's chaotic. But anyway, getting to my point, what I think would be a really cool idea, especially because, like I said, I think you have to kind of evolve something like a Verzuz if you want people to still keep watching, because people aren't in the house like that. It would be a cool idea if you had all four of those groups and they were all in a room together and they're just talking and telling stories about their experience, and they're still highlighting the songs, but they're just in a room just chatting it up and just talking and telling stories, because I think they have such a unique experience, and they were all out at the same time, and they were somewhat kind of pitted against each other. They never really had any heavy beefs or anything, but I'm sure there are some stories that you could get a good laugh out of. I'm sure SWV telling the story of the fact that they had to change their name because they originally were supposed to be called TLC, Taj, Lily, and Coco, but contracts were already put out there, and TLC already snatched the name up, and I can just imagine Coco and them reading the names and the documents like, wait a minute, T-Bose? T-Bone? Is it supposed to be T-Bone? You sure it ain't T-Bone? Bose? Whatever. Left Eye? Okay, alright. I noticed don't say Chili. You told me they was from Atlanta. It ain't even cold over there like that. What the heck? Like, I'm sure they would have had all kind of, stories, or even one of the things I kept finding funny, for some reason in the mid-90s, at a lot of the award shows, like from like 94, 95, 96, for some reason, Xscape always was presenting awards to TLC, and so there's this Soul Train Awards clip, and you have Tamika reading the paper, and this is like during the Crazy Sexy Cool era where like TLC's everywhere, so I'm sure they were sometimes annoyed, like, dang, all right. And so Tamika's reading the award, like, the best R&B single of the year or something like that, and Tamika looks at it and just, TLC. I was like, dang, I'm not even trying to hide it. And then there's this Billboard Awards clip where they win another award, and of course, it's Xscape presenting the award again, and that one is hilarious because, they come up to accept the award, and this one is just Chili and Left Eye because T-Boz is sick or something, and you got Candy and them in the back standing behind them, and Chili's just like, oh, we thank you so much, and Crazy Sexy Cool, it's at 8.5 million copies, you guys, and you just see Candy and them in the back.
We are the number one, the biggest girl group ever in history, and Crazy Sexy Cool has sold 8.5 million albums. Thank you, we love you.
It's just like, I don't know, that's hilarious to me, but I don't know. I think Verzuz has to do something to kind of evolve because it's going to get very redundant soon, and I just think the energy around it is all terrible now. And now, one of the things I keep seeing happen is every time there's somebody announced, everybody either trashes one of the acts because they don't think the other is capable to stand in a room with the other. It's just kind of killed it. Like, even seeing the Chris and Usher conversations, I'm just like, I'm over all this crap, but I'll still watch. Anyway, moving on. And then did you all see this clip of this woman getting her hair washed in the toilet bowl? Let me play the clip while I talk. Like, look at this foolery. Like, whoo, and they're serious too. And I mean, they got a whole system where, you know, they're gonna put something in the mole and the part on the back, and this so. I want to say something so out of pocket, but I'm trying to be a better person in life, so I'm gonna keep it to myself. But you know what? You know, you know, I don't know. It's almost like I saw this other story with the woman in Florida who she was swimming in the canal and somehow got lost and somehow ended up in the sewer system and was in the sewer for 3 weeks. I got questions because you got to eat something in those 3 weeks. You got to drink. Let's move on. Let's move on. And then I needed this laugh. This was hilarious to me for some reason. I don't know if you've seen this clip, but let's watch the clip and then we'll talk.
McDonald's, we only accepting cards. And before you order, we don't have any Sprite, no sweet tea, no fruit punch. Our ice cream and pepper machine doesn't work. Please keep your order small because there's only 3 of us in here.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know why that's so funny to me, but I felt all of her energy as far as the girl that was working there. Sometimes you just be over it. Like, look, let me just tell y'all right now, before you order, we don't have this, that, third. Look, it's 3 of us working here. Don't have no complicated order because it's 3 of us here working. It's just, I laughed so hard watching it. And the girl that recorded it was a good sport about it because, you know, depending on who it would have been, that girl would have got cussed out through the box. So that was funny. But I'll say this. The woman that was working at McDonald's, it's probably a good thing I didn't go there that day with my kids because I just think back to this one time. You know, I work with kids, I run a center, and there was a time period where I was also the soccer coach. I'm telling you, like when you run a community center, you got to do everything. You cooking meals, doing homework, walking folks home, everything. And so I was the soccer coach. Now we didn't have this dope season, and this was with my like 8, 9, and 10-year-olds. Like we had a dope season. They done won all the games. We killing it. Make it all the way to the championships, right? The tournament rounds. And you know, those are long days. If you've ever had to watch like a little league sports thing, you know, your team might win, but now that you've won, you go to the next round, but you can't play the next game until the other team's playing. So you be there for 5-6 hours. We made it to the last game and they just got blown out. It wasn't even close. They lost by like 6 points and stuff. So they're on the bus, you know, we're going home. They're on the bus just crying. And I was confused because normally you really only cry when you lose the close one. When it's a blowout, half the time you're like, forget it. All right, it is what it is. But, you know, it's those close ones those are the ones that cut you deep. Those are the ones you shed that strong tear for just to... But anyway, them kids was on that bus boo-hooing. Every last one of them except for like 2. So I felt bad. I was like, you know, let me take the kids to McDonald's. We'll go to McDonald's. And, you know... And I've already like brought up all of these kids to learn how to give their own orders when we go to places. Like I teach them to speak up, and because everybody's not always going to do it for you, so you got to kind of be able to take charge and lead a conversation when you're in a place of, you know, where you need to speak up. And so all the kids are in line. We went inside. All the kids are in line to give their orders, and it was just like, maybe I'll just take the orders because they couldn't get the order out. They were all crying. So one kid was like, I'm like. And I'm trying to understand, you know, it hurts to lose. So I'm okay. Yeah, all right. And mind you, I should have been the one crying because I was the one paying for everything. This was not on the company card. This was just out of the goodness of my heart. And I really didn't have to give. And that's when I also learned that kids don't even do Happy Meals. They eat food. So I'm watching them order Big Macs and Quarter Pounder and meat. What? Like that was what? And so when I saw that bill, what? Oh, y'all gonna eat this food. So they was crying and eating, and I don't know if you've ever watched people cry and eat at the same time. It's not funny, but I'm not laughing at the kids. I swear I'm not. But man, good times. Anyway, let's move on. Let's get to some of these foolish stories. Whole mood of the video is about to change. All right, here we go. And then there's Derrick Jaxn. Can I be honest? I had never heard of this man until 2 days ago. I could not for the life of me understand why I kept seeing this man trend. I'm like, what happened? I thought this was some athlete or something that had got caught up in some mess. And so I do my little research. I'm like, okay, this is some public figure that stepped out on a wife. And I couldn't figure out why his story was getting so much more attention than some of the other public figures that all step out and cheat or whatever they have going. I was like, why is this one getting so much attention? So then I discover, oh no, this is somebody that has built a brand on giving relationship advice and has books on this. And on top of that, he has a Christian approach. And so a lot of people follow this man and get their relationship advice. And he has a whole platform and hundreds of thousands of people that follow him. I'm like, oh, okay, I understand why the smoke is there. And so, you know, side note, I don't really follow like relationship gurus or nothing like that. I'm not even into stuff like that. But like, you know, I just think everybody's journey is different. And I think it's hard sometimes to measure your experience with somebody else's because, like I said, we're all different. We respond to things differently. The people we get in relationships with, everybody has their own unique approach and experience. I do think you can still utilize and reference some of the ideas or the best practices that people have. But if you take everything to heart and blindly follow some of these folks, they're going to lead you into a whole bunch of foolery. So be careful. That's all I'm saying. Have some discernment. The word for tonight is discernment. Man, so anyway, I follow up to kind of pay attention to what's happening with the story, and I really was not even going to talk about this, but since I haven't done a video in 2 weeks, I was like, you know, let me at least talk about what everybody else probably wants to see in addition to the heavier stuff. And so I watched this man and his wife, and he does this video where he pretty much acknowledges, yes, I have stepped out or something. I don't know if either he was trying to get ahead of the story before it came out, or if the story came out and he was responding to it, but all I know is I saw a video and it's him and the wife sitting there and he's talking about the infidelity and everything else he has. And it's this long video, so I didn't watch the whole thing because I don't care enough. But it was weird because it was like he was like squeezing the wife's hand like so tight. I'm like, what y'all playing? Red Rover? I'm confused. Remember Red Rover? Like you and the kids, y'all would hold hands at the playground and Red Rover said, John, ride over. And then John would run and try to break through the hands and man, you know, kids be breaking their arms and everything. I don't even know if kids play that anymore, but that was what it was giving me. I'm like, why is he squeezing this woman's hand so tight? And then the wife, I didn't know if she knew she was going to be on the video. I feel like she was taking a nap or having her time, enjoying her day. And he was like, come up here real quick. I need you for something. And when she got in the room, she sat down and realized the camera was set up and now she's on the live stream. That's what I kind of got. I was like, did you give her a heads up that y'all was going to be doing this? Because I don't think she knew. I don't know. But I don't know. It was weird. But then what makes it weirder, so in addition to, and again, I don't have the full details of what he actually did because I don't care, but he apparently stepped out. But in addition, he does the video with the wife. He makes a reaction video to his video. I was like, who does, what? Who does that? And so he makes a reaction video to his video where he critiques himself in like third person. I'm just, these social media folks, that's, okay, all right, okay, folks, all right, happy 2021. I see it's gonna be a wild year. And so he's doing this whole thing, and he also goes, he even references a book because he's like, you know, I already wrote a book about this, and it's, you know, you get a 50% discount code, just use the name. I'm like, wow. Okay, I don't see that marriage working, but just, oh. That's a lot. Something ain't right in the water. His energy is way off, and I feel bad for her because she seems to be in another world. And I think somebody was telling me like they've been together since college, so pretty much he is all she knows. I was like, oh Lord. But then what makes it crazy? Because for me, I'm like, okay, if you're gonna be a public figure and you do some foolery, then acknowledge your foolery by yourself. Don't drag the wife in it. Like don't call me out of my sleep to come up there and look crazy on camera and everybody talking about me, because really that's what's happening. The wife is the one catching it up. And see, that's why I say I don't follow these like relationship gurus, because half the time they got enough foolery going on. It reminds me of, I saw this clip one time, it was a few months back. This guy went viral. He was boasting and bragging about how he was such a good husband and the king of the castle. His wife ain't got to work, and that's why he's the man he is, and da-da-da-da. And, you know, and everybody was gassing him up and everything. And then a few weeks later, the whole family is on the Y'all to Fix My Life. Everybody. They got all kind of problems. Everything under the sun has happened under this man's roof, and he didn't even know about it. I was like, see, this is what I'm talking about right here. I mean, even the grandma was on the show. I was like, the grandma's not even in the marriage. How was she in this? It was the wildest thing. So I'm like, be careful with some of these folks y'all follow. But anyway, it's like, if you're going to do the foolery, you started the fire. So you sit in the smoke. Don't drag her in the smoke, because then she starts talking. That doesn't help anything either, because, God, she gets into these videos. I didn't see all of her videos. The only video I saw of her is the one she has on, like, the camouflage outfit, and she's addressing people that were talking about her wearing, I guess, the bonnet thing. And she was like, you know, you see a bonnet, I see the helmet of salvation. So she starts talking about the armor of God. I was like, I'm not gonna even address religion tonight, because I do have my faith, but I think there are some flaws in the church that need to certainly be addressed, and I would hope and pray that the black church has an evolved approach to when it comes to relationships, because it seems like there's still the narrative of struggle and pain in relationships, and it's so normalized. And I think I have an issue with that. I feel like the viewpoints are very dated, and I think people are taught to just stay in foolery, all in the name of God. And I'm just like, but if the relationship, I'm not even doing it. But man, so she goes on there and she, this is the helmet of God and the breastplate of righteousness, and I have the sword of the Spirit. And mind you, she's saying it with conviction too. You see a bonnet, I see a. I was like, okay. And so she's saying all this about the armor of God that she got on. Meanwhile, he over there taking off some other woman's clothes. I'm like, see, this is, oh, come on, y'all. Discernment. That's what I think people just need. Like, I will never challenge somebody for what they believe spiritually, because at the end of the day, what is in your heart, your mind, and your soul is for you and for your walk. But jeez, I swear, discernment, people. Discernment has to be a part of this conversation. This is why I think Tyler Perry gets a lot of smoke with his movies, because I started thinking back to Diary of a Mad Black Woman, but the play. I remember watching it at like 15, and so the play is similar to the movie. It's the husband steps out on the wife, and not only is he stepping out on the wife, he has a whole new relationship with the other woman, got a baby by the other woman. He's kicking the wife out the house. He's taking everything and leaving her with nothing. But then something happens, some kind of freak accident. He's paralyzed and so on and so forth. In the movie, she leaves him and she goes to bliss and happiness with the new guy. In the play, it's different. The play was like, oh no, you made a vow to God and y'all must keep it. And so literally, the husband somewhat, I guess, gets better. So they get back together at the end. I'm like, what? Because I was like, wait a minute. Because it was kind of like, I understand the conversation of the vow, but dang, he done broke it in 18 different ways. And then, I'm sorry, I don't care what freak accident somebody gets into. I don't care how many times people claim that they've switched up and they've changed. Sometimes that old habit comes right back out. And I'm like, he had just done too many things to that woman for her to just take him back. So I always looked at that play like, really? But that's kind of one of the narratives that's pushed out there. That's why I was kind of just like, okay. And so I feel bad for her, because I'm like, lady, come on now. Come on. I'm not trying to break up nobody's relationship, but discernment. So you got her out here looking half crazy, and the sad part is she's the one catching the smoke. Nobody's giving nothing to him, because as a matter of fact, his platform got bigger. That's one of the reasons why I didn't want to talk about the story, because I didn't even want to give him any additional energy. But I haven't done a video in 2 weeks, and y'all have been blowing up my social media. I do appreciate the wellness checks and everything, but people kept asking me about this specific story, and this isn't really the kind of content I even talk about most of the time, but whatever. I said, since it's been 2 weeks, I'll give y'all an extra treat tonight. But I'm just like, discernment, like, no, that's not how this works. And so I feel so bad. I'm like, where are your friends, woman? Who is in her friend circle to help her out? Like, come on. I'm not trying to spend the whole time, tearing down the relationship, but man, I think sometimes it's better to not even address anything on social media sometimes. Sometimes you got to just let some stuff blow over, and in the meantime, behind the scenes, you work on whatever you need to work on with your therapist or whatever y'all do. Like, social media is the worst place to expose your flaws, because people will eat you up and spit you out. And then it also opens the door for more chaos that ensue if there's more dirt that's still out there. So I think from what I've heard, just even before I started this video, there's more stuff that's coming out with this guy. And I'm like, wow, this man done built a whole brand on all this stuff, and he ain't even following none of it. But okay. And so that's what made it interesting. I'm like, in his reaction video, he's referencing his book. She, on the other hand, is referencing the Bible. I'm like, I need y'all to figure out y'all energy. What page are y'all on? And so, man, poor. And she seems like such a nice lady. I just think she's just done, unfortunately. I hope she's okay. But man, that just... discernment, people. That's the word of the day. It's just the discernment. I think sometimes people get so manipulated, and I think that's been one of the beefs that the church gets, is sometimes, and this is not even about the church, but I'm only referencing the church because he pretty much built his brand referencing the Bible and everything else, and he was looked at as like a Christian relationship expert. That's the only reason I'm doing this. But I think what happens is people have vulnerabilities, and I think a lot of times there are snakes pretty much that harp on those vulnerabilities and take advantage of people. I think Creflo Dollar is one of them examples, when he had the nerve to ask that congregation to help him raise $70 million so he could get a new private jet because the old one fell apart. Now listen, I was just like, okay, my beef with that, I was like, $70 million. And his reasoning was, he needs that to fly around the world and do his ministry. And I'm like, $70 million. You could have hired so many people to help you spread this message that's already available to the whole world to begin with for free. You know, you could have hired so many people to build a whole coalition and a team to do things, but you have locked into, again, that ego where I alone can do it, so I need $70 million for my private jet. And I'm like, no, you're supposed to be one of the shepherds. You know, you need to go ahead and lead the flock. You need to fly commercial with everybody else. You can do first class, but yeah, like, go ahead and get on the plane. Because to be honest, when the plane gets turbulent anyway, half the people on the plane think they're about to die. Go ahead and preach to the people. I'm just like, man, y'all be careful with some of these people y'all follow. Because, couldn't be me. Ain't no way you about to have me get up off the couch to come upstairs and I walk into a whole live session and you telling all the crazy stuff you did. Now I gotta look crazy like the Bambi lamb in distress. No. Why? Y'all can tell me how this unfolds because I'm not following the story. I don't care enough. So this is my last time talking about it. So y'all can update in the comment section. But foolery. Moving on. What? And then there's Meghan McCain. I'm getting ready to play a clip that pretty much everybody was talking about from The View from the other day. I want you to just listen to the language that is being used and how it's being used, and then we'll chat. Let's go.
And so we're going to a place where even if people need money, even if people are qualified to get into Ivy Leagues, race and gender is more important than your skill qualifications, the content of your character. It is not what Martin Luther King Jr. preached. I think this is a very, very slippery slope. I was very surprised to hear someone like Tammy Duckworth say something like this. She got a lot of blowback from a lot of people, not just on the right. And I think this is actually just the natural progression of identity politics. And I will say, just to put a cap on this, The View is 25 years old next year. We've only had one Asian American co-host this show. So does that mean that one of us should be leaving at some point because there's not enough representation? We're talking about, is identity politics more important than qualifications of a job? And I think that's a question going forward that the progressive left is going to have to reconcile.
Listen to the language and how it was used in her message. Now, mind you, this is in response to what's happening on the Hill in regards to the Biden cabinet being appointed and how you have one of the people represented in Congress who's saying, well, I don't want to vote to approve anybody else until more Asian Americans are represented in the cabinet. And so Meghan's response, of course, she goes on this whole spill about identity politics. And, you know, she throws in, of course, she has to throw in Martin Luther King because that's one of the things they love to do when they want to soften the blow of a racist viewpoint. Let's throw in Martin Luther King and twist the words and use it for our advantage. Oh, content of their character. Meghan, please, shut up. And so, you know, she jumps in that whole spill and then she goes into this part where she talks about gender and race and identity politics and how, you know, that pushes more so into the front in regards to things like qualification. The qualifications are now in the background because everybody is so pressed about race and gender. And so she's jumping onto that train. And I found it so interesting because the way that she presented that argument comes off as somebody who believes that they operate as the standard. Because when she said qualifications, I wanted to be like, qualifications according to who? Because it sounds like you're saying that whiteness, or pretty much white people, are already the standard. And the qualifications are up to their discretion and their discernment as to how they see things. And, you know, that's really one of the things that you run into when you have this conversation of qualifications, because that's one of the things that's always said, even in regards to affirmative action. One of the biggest arguments against it is, oh, well, you got all these unqualified people getting in there. And I'm always like, you know, when we start talking qualifications, first of all, there are a lot of mediocre white folks in charge of everything. So please, we're not going to go into that room. But again, going back to the idea of being the standard, many white Americans, pretty much in general, white Americans get the luxury to operate as the standard. They get to operate as being pretty much the face of the system. The system benefits them. The system is for them. They created the system. That is the standard. And they're going to do any and everything that they can do to protect that standard. Now, there are some who recognize that there are problems. They will work to try to open, you know, the floodgates to make things more of an even playing field. But the difference is this. White Americans get the option to choose whether or not they'd like to challenge themselves intellectually when it comes to growth, when it comes to getting uncomfortable. They get an option of whether or not they choose to do so. Because again, when you're the standard, you know, there's no rules that you have to abide by because it's already made for you. Other groups of people, black folks, other groups that are in marginalized populations, they don't get that luxury because you've never been the standard. And so our standard has always been being uncomfortable. And so we have to somehow find ways to manage and find a way to be comfortable in a system that works against us by fighting and clawing and working to do what it is that we do. So we constantly have to work on ourselves. We constantly have to grow. We constantly have to stay researched. We constantly have to challenge how we see the world intellectually. We have to constantly challenge the system that we live under. We have to constantly question things. We have to constantly not take things at face value. We have to constantly look at a larger scope of everything, because we recognize that we have a bunch of arrows and lasers pointed at us in all directions, whether it be in the physical, when it comes to something like police brutality, whether it be in housing discrimination, job discrimination, even in academia. There's a reason why people really hate the 1619 Project, because again, you got all these black folks who have done all this research and challenged the status quo. There's a verbiage and there's a narrative that has pretty much been laid out as the law of the land and the story of America, and it was presented as this happy, polished, utopian way where, okay, yeah, so we had to snatch a few folks from Africa and come over here, but look how everything worked out, and we are all great Americans, and the founding fathers were so great. So now you have some people who go on to say, F all that, we're going to listen, let me tell you about this person, that person, and how this all correlates to 2021. And so now you got people caught off guard who are not researched, and they come out with the 1776 Project to try to refute the 1619 Project, and they embarrass themselves. That's the prime point that I'm making. And so again, when you get to operate as the standard, you don't have to challenge yourself. Meghan McCain is the perfect example where she is never going to challenge herself intellectually, because she's used to getting her way in everything. She's used to her viewpoints being deemed as brilliant. She's used to being able to jump into doors. And it's so funny when she keeps talking about qualifications, because I'm like, your qualification is that John McCain was your dad. That's it. And that's so reflective of a lot of the experience of many people in America, where they come from a position where somebody in their family or somebody they knew was already in a position of power. They just had the association, and now they're in the door. Black folks have never had that, especially in the world of academia, especially in the world of media and a lot of these industries, because again, half the time we weren't even allowed to apply or work or even attend these institutions or anything like that. And so finally, you're seeing the first or the second generation of people who finally have an opportunity, but now they have to compete against industry and people who are now in these top management positions and so on and so forth. But again, qualifications. Meghan, you have no qualifications for anything, please. And she can't, and for her to be a journalist, it's so funny because she can't even take criticism. Every time somebody challenges her, you see how she responds. She sits there all pissy face. I just won't say anything else the rest of the show. And then they'll let her, and she'll get away with it. They'll let her sit there for the rest of the hour. Mad. Got that red lip or that purple lipstick on, pissed. Mad, looking all side-eyed. She don't even want to talk. And I'm like, take the privilege, because if I go and do that at my job, they're going to let me go. But she gets to do that on national TV in front of millions every single day because people didn't agree with her and she didn't like to be challenged. Like, that's the stuff that I'm talking about. And I find it so funny that she would reference the idea that, okay, The View has only had one Asian American host, so should one of us give up our seats? That's the other thing. They always look at somebody getting an opportunity as them losing something. You could always just add another panelist. The View didn't always have 5 people on the panel. They used to have 4 back in the day, and then eventually they got to 5. But again, when you don't like the idea of being challenged because you get to operate as the standard, and by the way, I don't agree that these people are the standard. I'm just saying this is how they see themselves, and this is what the system says. But when you get to operate as the standard, you see the opportunity of anybody else coming into your space as a threat. Why is it such a threat? Because you recognize that a lot of times when people get into some of these same positions that you're in, they're going to outperform you in everything because they've never got to operate as a standard. They had to work twice as hard to be considered half as worthy. So really, they worked 4 times as hard, and they really got their stuff together. So when they come up in there, they're coming to shake the table, and it's about to go down up in there, and that scares people. And so that's why you saw exactly what happened with the whole Sharon Osbourne situation with the talk. She didn't want to challenge herself. She was used to operating as a standard. She had her viewpoint. It got fried up. She didn't understand. And rather than challenging her own intellect, her own growth, she goes and challenges somebody else. She goes after Cheryl Underwood. Well, you explain to me then what it is. And you don't do that crying bit either, because the only person who should be crying is me. I was like, what? And then when you do the follow-up, you see what's happened. And so, you know, they got all these different shows canceled. And so, mainly because a white woman had a meltdown on the show, nobody's getting paid. We just going to postpone production for some weeks to let things die down, because that's how much we have going. And now I've heard that she's lawyered up and she's willing and ready to sue if they let her go. I'm like, see how y'all be doing? Again, when you get to operate as the standard, there's no limit to how low you will go to maintain that status quo, to maintain that level of comfort, because again, you get to operate and get what it is that you want. So even in regards to the whole situation with the massage parlors being shot up and that cop saying, oh, well, the guy had a bad day. operating as the standard. So the standard is, well, he's still a good person. He just had a bad day that day. This isn't normally like him. So yeah, he was just having a bad day. He went and shot and killed a few people. That's all. It is what it is. You know, it's a pretty good kid. You know, just like crazy. And so it reminds me of, I saw this on the news one time. It was some school, and the school had the cheerleading auditions. And of course, you know, when you talk about something like the cheerleading, it's different than what you may have remembered from 30 or 40 years ago. Today, cheerleading is like a whole sport. And those athletes get to flipping and tumbling and doing all these competitions, and they're doing some Olympic type stuff, right? And so there's some girl that doesn't make the squad. She just wasn't good enough. She wasn't coordinated. She couldn't keep up with the rhythm. She couldn't do the flips and the tumbles, and she couldn't throw nobody. She couldn't get thrown up. I don't know. But anyway, her parents sue. They sue the whole school district, and then in court, the parents win. And so it becomes ruled that, okay, everybody has to make the cheerleading squad. And so the actual cheerleaders who are on the team that are really the ones that really are doing all the combative, you know, physically draining stuff that they got to do, they're pissed off like, yo, we have whole competitions where we compete against, you know, some of the best, you know, athletic squads in the country, you know, and we have to make sure that the people that are on us have to, you know, they have to be at our mark. And again, that's an example of people not wanting to grow or challenge themselves. The parents not recognizing that, hey, no disrespect to your child, just this is not their lane. And this is why you have a JV squad. This is why you might have a C squad. You give you some time to build up, you know, try again next year. But in the meantime, work with one of these squads, work on your little craft, and come back and we'll see what we can get. But again, that's where it is, where folks, they're so used to being the standard that when they are inconvenienced or they have to get in a position to be uncomfortable and they didn't choose to, then everybody has to suffer. And so that's why Meghan McCain is quick to say, okay, well, which one of us want to give up our seats then if we're going to let one of them on? I can suggest one of you two black ones can go, because really, do we need two black folks on The View? Like, I feel like that's what you wanted to say. But again, it just goes to show foolery all around. I'm just like, man, I can't. Meghan is so irritating to watch on that show. But I found that so funny, because the way that the idea of identity politics has just been so weaponized. And again, it's just like, we would have had to have identity politics if America wasn't such a racist country. The reason identity anything exists now is because other groups of people who, again, were not privy to access, were rejected and pushed out and forced to live amongst each other and away from these people, because the ideas of redlining and the ideas of thinking that certain folks weren't worthy enough to be in close proximity to others. You now have a system where people have created an entire identity amongst themselves, a culture that is rich with their experience, because again, when you operate as the standard, you don't have to operate in the experience of being oppressed. And so now you're pissed off because all of these oppressed and marginalized groups of people have built themselves up, and now they have opportunities and they're kicking doors down, and you're nervous. You're uncomfortable because while you got to bask in the realms of being a standard, you never had to work on yourself. And now you're nervous, terrified. That's why everybody's so threatened by black people getting into higher spaces. And again, like I said, and I'm not talking about black folks who are going to go and play into that same system. I'm talking about black folks who are going to go into certain positions and shake the table and do right by the people, not continue to uphold a system that's screwing everybody over. I'm talking about people, and don't even got to be black folks, but folks who are coming from different realms of wherever, that work in the realms of making sure that other people and that everybody else has an opportunity to have somewhat of an element of prosperity. That is a threat to people who have never had to challenge themselves or work on themselves collectively. And again, it ain't everybody, but collectively, we always have enough represented to make this argument. Anyway, moving on. And then when it comes to the state of Georgia, and mind you, this is so much bigger than just the state of Georgia, because you're seeing it happen all across the country. And we've been pretty much covering this in real time for the past few weeks, because we're watching this same pattern take place in so many states. And this is all about voter suppression, of course. And so as of tonight, well, really yesterday, because by the time I uploaded this, it'll probably be midday Friday afternoon, the state of Georgia has pretty much signed into law a new set of restrictive policy when it comes to voting. And so, of course, the conversation of voter suppression laws. And it's interesting because we did a live back in February, and I was talking about how, you know, there were at that point in time 160 different bills that were being pushed all across the country to make it harder for people to have access to the polls and to vote. And then we did another live at the top of this month. And again, now that number had jumped from 160 to 253. And so what we just witnessed, this is one of those bills that were pretty much signed into law. And of course, it's something that's punitive. It's something that makes it difficult for people to have access to voting. Some of the elements in this law, now this was like a 95-page bill. It's now illegal to hand people a bottle of water if they're standing in line. the polling locations. There's some rules with how that has kind of changed. So when you talk about the ballot drop-off boxes, you know, those are not really a thing at this point. At this point now, the ballot drop-off boxes have to be inside of the voting precinct. And that's because, again, when you talk about absentee and mail-in voting, or absentee ballots or mail-in voting, now you need to have an ID number or a driver's license to do that instead of the signature match. So they want you to actually come inside and present that ID before you can put the thing in the box. Like, there's all kind of crazy things happening. They've cut down on early access to early voting hours and everything else like that. There's so many things that have changed. Some of the other things they've changed, I want to just make sure I read this right and don't quote this the wrong way. The bill will also allow the state election board to take over county election boards that it deems needs intervention. Skeptics say that it will allow Republican officials to decide which ballots count in majority Democrat areas, such as Fulton County. And so again, just listen to how that sounds. That's pretty much just saying that, hey, the people in charge, if they don't like how things are going in regards to voting because they think they might lose, they can go in there and just say, we just gonna go ahead and take this over. And so it's funny because this has all been presented as a way to protect integrity when it comes to voting. But everything that you're seeing is pretty much just all kind of like, okay, this is all real suspect, especially coming from Brian Kemp, where in 2018, sir, we watched you purge 200,000 voters off the rolls, specifically coming out of Gwinnett County as well. And a lot of folks didn't even know they were purged until they showed up to the polls and were told, oh, no, you can't vote. And so, again, it's interesting. And people may say, well, why is it that everybody's so pressed to make it difficult to vote? And some may not see the big deal about this and say, well, what's the big idea? Just have an ID. But all of these have been pretty much well-studied out ideas. And they recognize what it is that they're doing. They have a specific group that they would like to target and limit when it comes to voting. And they've pretty much figured out all the loopholes that will play a role into what makes it difficult for them to get to the polls. So if I bring up the idea, again, of even something like the bottle of water to people standing in line, one of the things you've seen take place in the last few elections is people are standing in line for hours and hours at a time, sometimes 6, 7, 8 hours. If you go back to 2012, Miami-Dade County, you saw people in line for 12 and 13 hours waiting to vote. Why is that such a thing? Because when you go back and notice, one of the things they've shown when it comes to the research is that a lot of times the areas that have the least amount of polling locations are always the areas where there's a huge black population in a Democrat city or location every single time. They purposely do that. So my earliest memory of seeing that would have been 2004 in Ohio, where in the metropolitan cities they didn't have enough polling locations, and so you saw people standing in the rain for hours and hours and hours. And it was to the point where, you know, they were trying to tell the folks, well, at this point the polls are closed, some of y'all can just go home. But, you know, it was just straight chaos. But at the same time, you could go to the rural areas and they had so many polling locations that they had to close some because they didn't have enough people coming there to vote. And so it was strategic. And I feel like you saw a lot of other states recognize that pattern and say, okay, well, let's try this too in our state. And so you start seeing that spread across and it becomes more and more common. And so the idea of giving somebody a bottle of water because, I don't know, maybe they're 75 and they've been standing in line for 9 hours in a place like Georgia, where sometimes, depending on what's happening in November, it might still be 80 degrees, 90 degrees outside. Now, you know, you can be arrested for doing that. That's on purpose. There's a reasoning for all of that. When people say, well, what's the big deal about cutting voting hours? Why don't you just go when it's time to go? Also remember, election days are not holidays for a lot of people when it comes to working, and people don't always have access to go and just run to the polls when they feel like it. Sometimes people can't go until they get off of work. And so, again, everybody is not living in a 9-to-5 lifestyle. Everybody's not living in a lifestyle where, you know, they have free reign to just kind of leave work and go do whatever they need to do in regards to voting. And so limiting access hours when it comes to early voting or anything else like that, or just limiting the options that people have with how they can vote and when they can vote, it makes it more difficult for people to have access to the polls. And at the same time, everybody is not 100% in the same realms of being politically driven. Some people could take politics wherever it is, and it is what it is. So it also discourages people from even participating. Even when you're talking about the signature matching, you know, there's all kind of conversations that take place. And so what's happening is this. This is a conversation about securing a power structure to ensure that things do not change as the demographics of voters continue to change. Because you have to think about what's been happening over the past 20 years. You've watched the demographic shift. Millennials are a little bit more liberal and free-spirited than the previous generation, and Gen Z is even more liberated and free-spirited than millennials, and so on and so forth. And so you're seeing the gap between the rich and poor expand. You're seeing the wealth gap between black and white expand. But what's happening as time continues to progress and more people come into the population, more people are represented in the bottom group that has a larger energy as far as people trying to obstruct their experience. And so more people are represented in the group that is being pretty much obstructed or disenfranchised. And so that group consists of younger voters who have an issue when it comes to what's happening with wealth, when it comes to inflation, when it comes to paying for college, when it comes to hopefully being able to purchase a home. But again, wages are so low and everything like that. They haven't been grandfathered into a lifestyle that older generations have been a part of. And so you have that demographic. Of course, you have black folks. Of course, you have those in the Latino community that vote a certain way. Those in other marginalized groups that vote a certain way, Native Americans and everything else like that. And so that pool gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the dangers of that to the people up top is that the numbers don't lie. The numbers can change the way that things operate. Now, I will say that this system is so complicated. It's not like everything can just change with everybody voting overnight and everything gets better. Oh no, because this is how I look at voting in the United States. Let me use an example, because I'll just say this. We always have this conversation that it's just bigger than just, the president and the governors and Congress and everything like that. But it's really extremely complicated when you look at how many political positions exist. Like when you're talking about these positions of power, sometimes, like even when you talk about cuckoo lady in Georgia, what's her name, Green or whatever, like she ran unopposed and got into her position. And so, the dangers of that as well is that you also have positions that are appointed, where people don't have to vote on those positions, but the people who were voted in, that got in, they can appoint different positions and sign people on. And so when you look at the American political system, there are like racks and racks and racks of positions that all, I'm talking to the microphone, that all pretty much build into a larger system that make this whole thing called America work. And so the GOP side has a strong hold on all of that. Like think about it, like say, let's use Drake for an example. This is so left field. So let's say Drake comes out with an album tomorrow. Drake is the talent. Okay, we recognize he's the talent, he's the entertainer. That would be like the president. But in order for something like a Drake to happen, there is an entire team of people behind Drake, but it expands and it expands. So that first initial team, that's going to be the A&R, the manager, the lawyers, and everything like that. So when Drake wants to do a project, you have the songwriters, you have the producers, you have the sound engineers, you have even the people who are going to do the logistics and make sure that the songs are registered. Okay, is this going to go to BMI or is this going to ASCAP and everything else like that? And so you have all that happening, and then you have the marketing team, and then the marketing team, okay, well, we got to do the music video. But even something like a music video has a team of dozens of people. It's just not Drake and the director and a few dancers and Let's Party. No, it's going to be Drake, it's going to be the dancers, it's going to be the person who's over wardrobe, it's going to be the person who's over logistics and scheduling everything and all the time, it's going to be the person who's over travel, getting everybody to the venue, getting the plane flights and everything arranged. It's going to be the people who are in charge of the editing, who's in charge of the filming, who's in charge of the clearances, because maybe he's going to be wearing a certain brand that he has to get a clearance from. So then that goes to another conversation. Now you're talking to some company, you need to talk to the representative. Can he wear this brand in his music video? And they're going to say, well, you need to talk to our lawyers. And it just goes layer to layer to layer. And so just even the music video has an entire army of things. Then when you're talking about the radio and everything, there's a whole team of all of that who do the logistics and work and fight the claw to get on the syndicated playlist. And then that's a conversation, because now you're talking to iHeartRadio and they got a whole system of how they do things and so on and so forth. And then when it comes to reporting the sales and everything else like that, now you got to go and check with all of the different sites and the opportunities, or not the opportunities, the outlets that provide access to sales. So, okay, yeah, you got the record stores where some people still buy records, but now everything is digital. So now, okay, you need to talk to Amazon, you need to talk to iTunes, but you need to go to the streaming sites as well. So we got to talk to Apple Music, we got to talk to Spotify, we got to talk to Tidal, all of these different things that are going to put together everything you need in regards to reporting, because that's going to go to Billboard, who's going to go ahead and they're going to correlate with Hits Daily Double and SoundScan to talk about them. Like, it's just like layer after layer. And then in addition to that, then if he wants to go on tour, that's another conversation, because you got to get the insurance policy to see if he's even safe enough to go on tour, because what liability lies with him. And so now you need to talk to every different venue, every different arena or stadium. If it's international, now you got to talk about the different commerce laws over, like, you see what I mean? Like, that's the same way American politics works. There are so many positions that are out there, and sometimes we don't even know about half of them. And so what you've seen now is there are so many people in some of these little positions we've never heard of that get to call a lot of the shots for bigger decisions. So when you're talking about these state legislatures that are going and voting some of these things in, and just some of these different committees and so on and so forth, that's American politics. And so what's happened is the people way up here knew that decades ago, 50, 60, 70 years ago. They have strategically planned this crap for decades and locked it in, and they have a stronghold on everything, because that's how we get into the conversation of gerrymandering and some of the other things that happen, and purge laws and voter rolls. Like, some of that is some new stuff. Purge laws were not something that always existed. That was something that kind of existed when they discovered, hey, we can push people out and say, oh, you didn't vote in the last election, so you must not be a voter. Purged. And then you got to go through the whole process of registering again. And so there's just so much that is taking place. And I just found it so funny that, again, they try to say, oh, well, this is all about integrity. This is all about election integrity, to make sure that there's no voter fraud. And clearly, it's already been proven a million times there was no massive voter fraud in the last few elections at all. It's not a thing because, one, people aren't that pressed. And again, to commit something as serious as voter fraud to the point where it can change the dynamics of an election, you need numbers and people represented to really go and do that. A lot of people are not willing to put themselves at risk to do such a thing, because they recognize nobody wants that kind of federal felony. Nobody wants that kind of smoke. Most people aren't that pressed. And even when we talk about these politicians, a lot of these folks that are running for office, most of the people don't even care for. The real politicians that people really like and that are near and dear to their hearts, they're usually pushed out because they can't raise enough. They don't have an establishment to push them. And so by the time you get to these elections, people go to the polls and they're like, okay, who is the least terrible? Okay, this person's going to do this, but this person's going to do that. But if I vote for this person, they're going to take away this. Okay. No, I was kidding. And so it's just like, it is chaotic. But you've seen just all of the approaches and the attempts to continue this. And it's going to keep going and happening all across the states. Now, we've seen that in the House, they have HR 1, which is supposed to be the For the People Act, which is supposed to go and kind of combat some of this. And when you really think about it, we're in a lot of this because, again, the Voter Rights Act of 1965, there were some elements of that were gutted and struck down back in 2013. Thanks, Clarence Thomas. Like I said, again, these conversations of people in high spaces, black faces in high spaces, aren't always a good thing. You got to pay attention to what it is that they're doing when they get in there. But let me read a portion really quick. What I wanted to read for you guys, and this is in regards to that very bill. Where's it at? All right. The entirety of 9 states, Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Texas, and Virginia, and 69 other jurisdictions in California, Florida, New York, North Carolina, Michigan, and South Dakota were originally covered by the law, which abolished barriers to voting and required the jurisdictions to get pre-clearance from the Justice Department to make any changes to the voting rules. Now, that was one of the sections that was struck down in the Voter Rights Act. And the reason why that portion was there at one point in time was because all of those places listed had such a history of discriminating against black voters that the federal government had to step in and say, listen, y'all done did so much stuff. At this point, before y'all change anything, you need to talk to us first, because we need to make sure that you're in line with what's in the Constitution. That has been what's struck down. And one of the reasonings it was struck down was because folks said everything is equal now. There's no issues with voter discrimination or, anti-blackness or white supremacy. That stuff is up the past because Martin Luther King died and had a dream and the rest of the world woke up and everything is all good now. And so now, here we are, 8 years later, and you're watching every year all of these different policies just get pushed out there. And this was even happening before the general election date. So when you saw some of the things that some states were trying to push before the election, like we saw in Pennsylvania, it didn't get pushed through successfully. But one of the ideas was, okay, well, with the absentee voting, we're going to have it set up where people can vote early via absentee, but we're not going to count the ballots until election day. And whatever isn't counted by midnight, we just throw out, because again, it's election day. If it wasn't counted on election day, then it doesn't count, And so, of course, when you talk about the logistics and the demographics of who was doing absentee voting in the last general election, when you're talking demographics and race and political affiliation, you knew that there was an obvious target on certain groups of people. And so that's what you're seeing take place. And that's why I'm just like, okay. And I think with Georgia, they're setting up for 2022 because, again, Warnock, he has to run again. He was filling in, pretty much his Senate seat is the replacement for somebody whose term had pretty much, I forgot whatever happened. But long story short, he got to run again. That's all I remember. But he has to run again. And so, again, let's make it difficult for people to vote to make sure he doesn't get in there. Because if we can get him out, then the Democrats no longer have that majority. And Republicans can come back in and go right back to the same foolery they've been doing forever and a day. And again, it's just like, it's so much. So draining. And then you saw like the Cindy Hyde lady from Mississippi talking about, oh, well, you know, I'm not against them, you know, ending voting on Sunday because that's the Sabbath. That's the day we're supposed to keep holy. I'm like, see, y'all be playing these games where you pick and choose where you want to be religious. So you'll do all this oppressive stuff to the people of the states that you represent. You will let people starve. You will let people die. You will let people be homeless. You will let people not get paid a living wage. You will let people live through all of these punitive experiences. And then you want to quote the Bible and pretend all of a sudden you're God-fearing. Please, cut the crap. Well, oh my God. Sometimes I'm like, Lord, let it be segregated, please. Because if I got to spend eternity with some of these folks, jeez. That's a joke. Don't take me literally. Anyway, so we'll see where this goes. I don't know if this For the People law will get pushed. Because even in the Senate, you got, what's his name from West Virginia, who's just all cuckoo. And he's a little crazy on some things. So, but that will definitely be something that pretty much guts a lot of these suppressive laws that are being introduced into a lot of states. I was shocked to see some of the other states that were on it. I'm like, some of you states that claim to be so progressive, y'all got a whole lot of really terrible anti-black legislation as well. What's up with that? I mean, we're not surprised, but again, we see things as they are. Anyway, we shall see how some of these stories unfold. I know that they finally have locked in a jury selection in regards to the Derrick Chauvin trial. Remember, he's the individual that killed George Floyd. And so we'll see how that unfolds. I'm a little nervous about that jury. I'm like, I don't know. But we'll keep hope alive. But anyway, share your 2 cents. I have a few more things I would like to talk about, and this video just ran close to an hour, so I'm like, I'm not going to keep you guys held hostage for this long, so I'll just actually break this up and have some separate videos on some other topics that I would like to discuss. And so yeah, we'll definitely get that going. And also there's a new podcast episode that will be uploaded to the platforms on Tuesday, so for those who like the Comedically Hard-Headed podcast, there's finally a new episode on Tuesday, and so yeah, we'll go from there. But anyway, I'm out. Share your 2 cents, subscribe.